Welcome to our presentation on successful productive activities and some of their important features. First activity we're going to look at is a speaking activity called Get to Know Your Group. The students are put into groups of maybe 3, 4, or 5 people, and they're given a list of discussion questions and a time limit. As they go through these discussion questions, they discuss them together and then note down what is similar in their group, what things are the same for all of them, and what are the differences in the group. Then at the end of the time, they organize this information and do a little presentation to the class about their group, sharing with the class some of the similarities and differences. Advantages of this task is that by telling students to note down the similarities and differences, they've been given a communicative outcome for this task, or they've been given an objective. In my experience doing this, quite often they just get so busy talking, they forget about this. And some of these questions, like what would you like to be doing in 5 years? It's very rare to have everyone be the same anyways. Also, preparing the information for a presentation at the end also does give them an objective. I find I typically have to set limits, so otherwise sometimes they'll get up in the front and just go through every question and recite their answer to it. So I'll say something like, find the 5 most interesting things about your group to present. Next is a role play speaking. There's an example here where for a job interview, one person is given the role of the international business manager. The other person is applying for the job. So this is really great for grammar points, potentially, if it's a productive part of the end of the grammar lesson. This one in particular here is set up for present perfect, for talking about past experiences, but it could be used with a number of different grammar points depending on the situation. Future forms for a conversation with a high school guidance counselor, motives of obligation for a parent telling her child the rules for borrowing the car, etc. It also does not need to be used for grammar. It can be used for a communicative follow-up for a reading or listening, if the students are assigned roles which maybe reflect some of the situations in the text. Next is picture-based writing. So the setup for this is giving the students a picture and then giving them prompts to write about. So for example, if they're studying animals and comparatives, they could be given 2 animals and told to compare and contrast them. But the prompts can vary widely. It could be used for doing narratives, could be using for connecting a series of pictures, depending on what the objective is. It can be a really great way to get the students engaged in writing by giving them a visual prompt, and it's not very restrictive, but it may be difficult for some students who view themselves as less creative to get started. Another one is make a poster and do a presentation. So making the collaborative poster could be speaking if they do it in the target language, but then getting up in front of the class and presenting their poster would definitely be speaking practice. This could be used for a grammar point. For example, present perfect, what are some places that everyone in your group has been to? So the communicative outcome is they have to use the target language to talk to each other and find things that are in common to put together on their poster. But it doesn't necessarily have to be used for grammar. Another activity is find someone who is similar to you or different to you. This is typically used for a freer production in a grammar lesson. So for example, talk about everything you did yesterday for the past simple, or talk about your plans for the weekend for a future form or something like that. But to give it more of a communicative objective, instead of just mingling around the room and talking to people randomly, students are instructed to find the person who has the most similar who is the most similar to them. So if you're talking about future plans, find someone who has similar future plans to you, or sometimes this is set up as find somebody who you want to spend the weekend with because you and they have similar tastes or similar objectives. It can also be done in reverse. Find somebody who is the most different to you. And this is maybe not so much a speaking task as a communicative objective that could be put onto just any different speaking task. There's a variation on here, which is find the lie. So for example, students will talk about everything they did yesterday. All of it is true, but there's one lie that they put in there, and the other students who are listening to them have to listen and find the lie. It gives the person who is listening a reason to listen to them during the mingle. Moving down here, another activity is fortunately writing. So this is based on the children's book Fortunately by Remy Charlep, which is up here. It can be found, if you're not familiar with it, you can borrow some of these PDFs which have the text of the book. As you can see here, it goes fortunately, unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately. So fortunately, a friend loaned him an airplane. Unfortunately, the motor exploded. Fortunately, there was a parachute in the airplane. Unfortunately, there was a hole in the parachute. So students listen to this story, and then they construct their own story using fortunately or unfortunately. In my experience, they have a lot of fun writing these stories. They get into the fun of the zaniness of it. Usually they write with a partner. When I do this in the class, there are always a lot of pairs who are sitting there giggling as they're writing the story. And then the stories are posted around the room, and the students will walk around and vote on which story they think is the best. So that's an opportunity for peer content feedback. Another activity here is collaborative story writing. So this is done in groups of about 3 or 4. You give each one a paper, and you would fold the paper along the lines so that the students, they can only see one. Everything else is folded here below the fold. So it's all folded up. And you give each one a prompt. So write the name of a place, write the names of 2 people, what are the 2 people doing, what happens next. And so each person, as the paper is being passed around, and I usually have students do this as a comic book or a comic panel. So if you search Google, you can find comic templates, which will have different, it'll be a sheet of paper with different panels on it where the students can draw in the pictures and write the story. And then they can even get some speaking practice here by presenting their comic to the other groups. And you can have them present to several different groups with task repetition. Speaking of task repetition, 4-3-2 speaking activity is a good one for task repetition. In this one, the students are given a prompt. For example, talk about a time you were proud of something, some sort of story from their past. And then they have 1 minute to prepare their speech and take notes or check a dictionary for any necessary vocabulary, prepare the vocabulary that they will need. Then they talk to a partner for 4 minutes. After the 4 minutes, the then they change partners and they talk to the next partner for 3 minutes. And then they talk to the next partner for 2 minutes, each time telling the story again. This is an activity that comes from Scott Thornberry's book, Uncovering Grammar. Although I don't think it's actually a Scott Thornberry original. I think this is a classic classroom activity that he just reported on in his book, but that's where I heard about it first. The rationale behind having the students speak so many times is the first time they're telling their story, they're so focused on the message of what they want to say that they don't have any attention left over to attend to accuracy issues like grammar or pronunciation, articulation issues. But then once they've gotten their story out and they've told it the first time, then once they repeat it the second time, it's much more automatic and they're able to tell it much quicker, which is why the time keeps decreasing each time from 4 minutes to 3 minutes to 2 minutes. But they will also become more accurate just because they now have attention freed up to attend to the grammar and articulation and other accuracy issues. Now, as Scott Thornberry presented this in his book, it sounds like the students will become more accurate with task repetition automatically without intervention from the teacher. Although when I do this in my classroom, I like to help them, push them to accuracy. So I give them delayed feedback in between each repetition. So while they're speaking, I'm in the middle of the room with my notebook, writing down any errors that I hear as well as any good language and put it on the whiteboard in between repetitions. Although that does have the effect of lengthening the amount of time the activity takes if you put in feedback after each time. The activity is called 4-3-2 because it's 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. And the way Thornberry wrote it, it was 4 minutes for one person to talk and tell their story. I've never had a student who was able to talk for 4 minutes. Typically, in my classroom, they dry up after 2 minutes. So I've adjusted this to 4 minutes for both partners to tell their story. But I guess as it was originally formulated, it's 4 minutes just for one person. Rewriting a poem as prose. This one also comes from Thornberry's Uncovering Grammar. So the students are given a poem and they have to rewrite it as prose. It's writing practice, obviously, but it's also helps them to become aware of the features of poetry by having to translate it into prose. Taboo as a speaking activity. Taboo is, I think, a common game that most people are familiar with. You can, as it's originally set up, you have a word that you have to describe to your partner, and then there are a number of words that you can't say, the taboo words. Although, depending on the level of challenge, sometimes you don't even need to have taboo words. You can just have them describe the word without having to say the word, and that's challenge enough. It's obviously good vocabulary practice if you're running through a vocabulary set. But it can also be just used as a general fluency activity because it is getting the student speaking. It has a very clear communicative outcome. They want their partner to be able to guess the word. And it can be used for grammar as well, like defining clauses. This is something that you use in the kitchen. It does require very careful monitoring to make sure that students are using it correctly and not cheating and using full sentences. Another writing activity here is to write the end of a story. So in this activity, I will bring in a story to the class, quite typically a children's story, but one that I don't think my students will know. For example, The Cat in the Hat, which is of course very famous in America, but my Vietnamese students don't know this story, I find. So I show them the book or present it up on PowerPoint. We go through the book up until about the halfway point, and then I stop the story and I say, okay, now you write the end. And with a partner, they do collaborative writing. And then once they finished their ends, we post them around the room. They read the endings that their classmates have written, and they vote on the best one. In my experience, they have a lot of fun with this. I mean, they really like to write kind of silly or outrageous endings, but they have a lot of fun with their partner just thinking of very ridiculous endings for the story. It could also be used, like a lot of these, you could give them delayed feedback on grammar or language issues by just going around and looking at some of the endings that they've written up and just making a few notes of grammar issues to clarify later. Another classic one is discussion questions. Now, this has the obvious disadvantage of not having a communicative outcome. It's just discussion questions that the students talk about. They can be used for a certain grammar point. For example, here they're being used for present simple habits. So they can be used for a grammar lesson, but they can also be used as a communicative follow-up to a listening or reading lesson. And they can, if you have a topic you want the students to talk about, sometimes it's, even without the communicative outcome, the topic will work well enough. But there are variations. Walking around the room, I've sometimes heard this referred to as a galley walk, where you, instead of giving them all the questions on a handout, you post these questions all around the room, and they have to walk around with their partner and talk about each question as they get to it. It's good for getting them out of their seat and getting them more active. Also, speed dating. So there are two circles. The students will have maybe topic cards on their desk or chairs, and you give them a time limit for 2 to 3 minutes. And then once the buzzer goes, then each person in the outer circle moves around one seat, and then you start the timer again, and now they have a new partner, and they pick out a new card to talk about a different topic, or maybe the same topic if you want to do task repetition again. So did I get everything here? Yes, so these are some of the activities that in our group we've successfully used for productive activities for both speaking and writing. And hopefully this has been useful for you.